built a big boat, saved humanity. And after his passing, in the 10th chapter of Genesis, we find these words, which I was going to have Matt read, but I promised him I wouldn't give him any tough words. These are the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, to whom children were born after the flood. Japheth's sons, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javid, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. Gomer's sons, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. Javid's sons, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodnid. From these island nations were divided into their own countries, each according to their languages and their clans within their nations. Let's pray this morning. Gracious and holy God, we give this time, this day, and this message to you. Speak into our hearts once again and reveal to us more clearly how we might be faithful in our duty and in our call to minister with you, for you, and by you. Amen. We close our series, The Gospel in Everyday Life, wrestling with probably the hottest topic today, immigration. What do we do with a foreigner who wants to live amongst us? Now, before you get nervous, it is not my intention to make any comment on whether we should or should not build a wall to the south, or whether we should or should not separate families. I want us to step back a little deeper and to wrestle just what is going on here when we wrestle with the foreigner or the immigrant who wants to live amongst us. Were you surprised today to see that early in the Old Testament, God tells us not to glean to the edge of our fields or strip all the grapes and go back, but to leave those for the poor and the marginalized? I think what we want to do is be a hospitable people. But on the other hand, in doing so, we've learned the lesson time and time again that there are people who come amongst us who seek to hurt us and harm us. So how do we deal with that? Everyone deals with that, don't they? The church wrestles with how to be hospitable, opening, and yet, you know, the United Methodist Church says open doors, but we have doors on all of our churches. And we just installed a big security system here to be more secure. How do you wrestle hospitality with safety and concern? That's really the question that we have, isn't it? How is it we can continue to welcome foreigners and find ways to sort out the good ones from the bad ones? I think our government wrestles with this. I think our leadership wrestles with this at various levels, school administrators, etc. And I thought this week about the foreigners in my life. Because, you know, beyond about 3.5 weeks, it's about the longest period of time I've ever spent in a foreign country in one continuous basis. Long enough so that I would still be fed by the restaurants instead of the grocery stores. I've never lived in a foreign land where I had to find a way to adapt to a new language, a new culture, a new way of life. But that doesn't mean I haven't known people who have. My wife and I built a house in Columbus. And after we lived there for several years, the family moved out and sold it to a family who didn't look at all like us. I have to be honest with you. We cast a suspicious eye upon them. They were a Middle Eastern family from Jordan. The father of the family was a gentleman I would come to know way too late, named Chuck. He was clearly Islamic. He told me he moved from Jordan. He's trying to make a way of it. Now, if I go back and look at what I know about the Muslim faith, I might in some way look and listen to words of jihadism, people that seek to do us harm, people who worship a different type of God, a different understanding of God, that might challenge whether or not my foundation is secure enough to defend, if invited in some way. But I learned Chuck was just an everyday guy trying to make a living. He opened up a convenience store in an old bank because he felt this gave him the competitive advantage that if his customers came through the drive-thru, they could place their order in that little window and then come up to the front door and just park, and then all their groceries could be brought out and put in the car. For elderly, this is a great service, and he thought this would give him a competitive edge over other markets and convenience stores in the area. One day, while loading pop, I'm told soda, we had this conversation. Pop. Okay. Coke. A Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Come Holy Spirit.
Pepsi.
Into people's cars, he threw his back out. And he required surgery that had him laid up in bed for more than a year. He had a young son who was maybe early middle school age, late elementary school. He had a couple daughters and his wife. One day while I was out mowing the yard, I saw his wife wrestling to try and put the kids' birthday gift together. It was one of those big trampolines. Sometimes pulling the tension on that top and hooking those springs is tough. So I stopped the mower, went around. Didn't know how she would respond and just said, "Do you need some help?" She said, "Thank you," took it. She said, "Come in and have something to eat." I felt like I was at Grandma's house. I said, "No, I just cut the lawn." And I'm in the middle of cutting the lawn, and I turn around and she's coming with a soda and pop, whatever you call it, and a plate of cookies. Every time we did something for her, she was always there to give in return. The winter came, the snow fell, and I thought this might be the perfect opportunity for us to show Christ to them. So I called my neighbor across the street, Bob. "Hey Bob, let's go over and shovel Chuck's walk because I don't think they'll be able to get out. Let's do it quietly so they don't know." I think she heard that first scrape of that shovel and she turned the oven on. Not to cook me, but before every time we did it, before we were done, she came rushing out with a warm, fresh baked plate of cookies for us. We never got out of her grasp. When it was time for us to go into the ministry, to sell our home and to leave, she appeared at our door with a fresh plate of cookies. And she said, "You know, we're going to miss you because we've never had Americans treat us like this." I don't think Jenny can still go into the grocery store. She's still working in that city, teaching. If she stops at the grocery store on the way home and runs into Chuck's wife, she still runs across the grocery store and gives her a big hug. For years, I kept my distance from Chuck because I didn't know about him. And I was afraid of what I had heard and what I had known about foreigners coming into a foreign land. What do the scriptures have to say? I read for you from Genesis 10 this morning, the depiction of how God separates us into different ethnicities, different people, different customs, different traditions, different cultures, and in some way we draw borderlines just like we do with our neighborhood. Just so we know that we have to care for, and that we don't have to care for. Boundaries are natural when we live together, aren't they? From the text that Matt read for us this morning, a commentary I read this week said, "A landowner should not endeavor to gather as much as possible from their fields, either by harvesting all the way to the corners or by going back over the field." The same standard applied to the owner of the vineyard. Vines should not be stripped, nor shall the fallen grapes be picked up. The fallen grain in the corners are to be left for the poor and the resident Indian to glean. These people have little income, and during hard times, little hope of earning a living. God wants the landlords to be thankful for the harvest and to express their acknowledgement that God has richly blessed them by sharing some of that with the unfortunate. This standard of generosity is prudently formulated. On the one hand, it does not place an added burden on the landlord who does not have to pay for the collection of these additional gleanings. And on the other, the poor and the foreigner maintain their dignity, for in place of the handout, they're given the privilege to labor for their own needs. They have to expend effort to experience God's grace manifested through the landlord's generosity. Leviticus 19:33 goes on to say, "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were once strangers in the land of Egypt." Hebrews 13:2 says, "Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it." Deuteronomy 32:9 says, "When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, then he separated the sons of man, and he set the boundaries of these people." And Revelations talks about the harvest in Revelation 21. "And the city has no need of sun or moon, for the glory of God illuminates it, and the Lamb is its light. The nations will walk in its light, and the kings of the world will enter the city in all their glory. Its gates will never be closed at the end of the day, because there is no night anymore." How do we welcome the foreigner and live amongst them? I had the blessing during my seminary years of being able to go to Israel. Israel has two nation states, the Israeli nation and the Palestinian nation, who share a land in Israel, and three religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We had the blessing, while there, of having a chance to engage with, in conversation, people from all six classifications: an Israeli Jew, an Israeli Christian, an Israeli Muslim, a Palestinian Jew, a Palestinian Christian, and a Palestinian Muslim. To kick off our conversation together, we heard a presentation by an Israeli Jew from Chicago who went home, he said, to Israel to reclaim the land God had given him. There was about a 20-minute presentation, and then there was a chance for us seminarians to ask whatever we wanted. We had some interesting conversations. And then after a short break, a Palestinian Muslim came in, the opposite end of the spectrum. He gave his presentation. One of our professors said, "Does anyone have any questions?" I looked around the room, and everyone was entertaining their shoes. There was one student with his head popped up. It was me. I watched the professor say, "Anyone have any questions?" As he looked me in the eye, and I go, "No." People were still determining if they had enough wax on their shoes. So he said, "Okay, Joe, what do you have?" And I said to the gentleman, "I'm not sure you will understand this phrase, but I think we need to name an elephant in the room. Just put out there something that I think is on all of our minds. Do you mind?" "Go for it," he said. "I want to know how you feel about the events of 9/11. It was the most gracious way I felt I should ask the question. He said, "Why, what were you told?" He said, "Let me ask you this. Were you told that when the second plane hit the tower, we rushed to blood banks to donate blood for the survivors? We got down on our knees and prayed prayers of comfort for the families that would lose a loved one, healing for those who would survive but have too heavy wounds. That God would be there in healing of heart, mind, soul, and body. Were you ever told that we did whatever we could as the Muslim faith to lift prayers of peace and comfort, that God would find the people who did this and bring them to justice?" I said, "No, I don't think I've ever heard that in a news story from my recollection." He said, "You know, sometimes the extremists in their actions speak unfairly for the whole. If you don't mind speaking of the elephant," he said to me, "your President, George W. Bush, ordered the bombings of my people in Iraq and Afghanistan, and at times killing innocent people in the wake. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that President Bush is a Methodist." Ouch, he was, I thought. Is this how you feel about us? Never thought about it that way. He said, "If you live amongst us at any period of time, you'll notice that we all try and live in peace. Sure, there are signs that we are different, and there are walls that are being built. Don't get me wrong, we saw them, that separate the borders between Israeli and Palestinian areas that we don't agree with. But we all want to live in peace." Besides, you don't need foreigners to come in your country and do you harm. Neither do we. We have people who reside amongst us that do that just fine. Ouch. Another reality. We wrestle with the question of how to offer hospitality and welcome and do it so that we can safeguard those we love and care about and seek to care about. I'm not sure I come today with a complete answer to this question, but just to point out the obvious question that we wrestle with. And we as the Christian faith understand that even though we die, we live. Amen? Amen. So if Chuck sought to do me harm, I would have met Jesus earlier. I just read this week, somebody posted on Facebook, the last sermon Billy Graham ever delivered, meant at part to be read at his funeral. where he says, "Today you are worried that I am dead, but let me assure you, I have never been more alive in my life, because I have Christ." And if we truly embrace that idea, that love, that reality, the worst thing a foreigner could do to us who seeks to do us harm is take us to our Savior faster. I hope, just like I learned from Chuck, that I find the opportunity to share the gospel with a foreigner and make them a friend. Even if they look differently, even if they celebrate different holidays, even if they understand life differently, they are still God's beloved. It's a challenge for us all, isn't it? To live fully into the gospel that God calls us to live. Remember, in Revelation, one day we will all live together. And the city has no need for sun or moon, for the glory of God illuminates the city. And the Lamb is its light. The nations will walk in its light, and the kings of the world will enter the city in all their glory. The gates will never be closed, and the end of day shall never come, because there will always be light. Open up your bulletin for me this morning, will you? Because I prayed this prayer for you today. And now I'd like for us to pray it in unison. Reverend Ann Wines, Queens. I'll change anyone's name. I see your pain and want to banish it with the wave of a star, but I have no star. I see your tears and want to dry them with the hem of an angel's gown, but have no angel. I see your heart fallen to the ground and want to return it, wrapped in clothes woven of rainbow, but have no rainbow. God is the one who has the stars and angels and rainbows. And I am the one God sends to sit beside you until the stars come out and the angels dry your tears and your heart is back in place. Rainbow blessed.